It's an And Justice for All poster, and it's from our federal funder. So you can be sure, who wants to be sure that you have a right to access our program and an accommodation if necessary. If you have any questions or concerns, we'll hope that you'll let us know. And the poster lets you know how you can contact the federal government. And I understand it's totally absurd and blurry. So what I'll do is I'll drop a link to the poster in the chat and also share it with Deb. Deb, are you okay with me sending some resources to you in an email and forwarding that along to the participants?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Should have asked you that beforehand while putting you on the spot. Okay, that sounds great. So yeah, I am here to talk about the Learning Garden. I really want to start by giving a very sincere thanks for playing such a big role in the lives of our children. I'm a parent of an 8- and 4-year-old. So I definitely have a very deep appreciation for the work that you do, the challenges that you have every day, and the value of the dedication that you demonstrate every day. So I really can't thank you enough for the work that you do. And I do have a fantastically fun role at the University of Maine Cooperative Extension, where I help home and community and school gardeners throughout both Aroostook and Penobscot County. And I do a lot of one-on-one work, especially with schools or daycares or any group that's interested in building their gardening program. And so today what I'll do is I'll talk with you about resources, and I'll give you some tips and tools and share some really brief introductions to some very simple activities to consider in your curriculum or in your schedule, and then hopefully open up to discussions and questions. But with such a small group, I would definitely love for you to chime in anytime with any questions or thoughts. And if you feel more comfortable doing that in the chat, feel free to do that too. I will confess that as soon as I shared my slides, I can't see anyone. So if you're relying on body language, I can't see you at all, which is a little bit awkward. Let me see if I can fix that real quick before I maybe, because it is a little distracting when I can't see anyone. Are you still there?
We're here.
Okay, cool.
And I can see the chat and the participants. So.
Oh, there you are. I found you. It's just something interesting. It's an interesting feeling to be just talking to your computer and not even have a face there. It makes you wonder about your mental health. So I'll start with actually just one of the resources here on this slide is Rogers Farm Demonstration Garden. So I work with a group of wonderful volunteers, and one of their volunteer projects is this demonstration garden, which is at 914 Bennick Road in Old Town. Again, I'll share some details. I'll link to this site in the email, but it's open to the public 7 days a week, sun up to sundown. But we do also host visitors, and we really would love to see more visitors, especially the younger ones. The energy they bring is fantastic. We have field days, we have field trips actually scheduled for this May and early June and in the fall as well. So I think we've got at least 160 kids planning on coming in the near future, which is exciting. But we have grown-ups come as well in family-friendly field days. So anytime that you could stop by and drop in, bring a picnic and walk around informally or come to one of our events, we would love to see you there. And that's divided up into about 30 different plots, all planted and maintained by Master Gardener volunteers in a variety of different techniques and types of plants growing there, including a wide array of native plants, crop rotation based on plant family, and new introductions and so on. We actually have I think it's a night and day garden is one of the themes that I thought was kind of a fun one to share. So gardening can look a lot of different ways and really reflect the different personalities of those that are attending the gardens, which is what I love the most about Rogers Farm. So Another resource that I hope you get to know much better, where I'm selfishly promoting the University of Maine Cooperative Extension. I'm clearly biased, but I think we have some amazing resources for Maine gardeners. And that's one key thing with gardening is, as you're looking for information about gardening, definitely make sure that you're looking for gardening tips and information that's based on your region, because a lot of what information that you get out there on the internet might not apply to your growing conditions or the pest pressures or disease pressures that you might have in your area. So tapping into your local research-based information is super helpful. And we have everything from videos, and our videos are usually about 5 minutes long, from anything from how to prune your blueberries to how to plant your asparagus, and how to manage Japanese beetles, and actually a lot of great information about ticks. And so beyond gardening, there's a lot of great information on there. We have a free monthly newsletter that comes out right in your email if you want, or you can just hop on and look through our archives and find our current information as well. And then Victory Garden for Me was a new one that stemmed from our remote learning experiences with COVID, and that's 11-part series. They're they're a little bit longer videos, about 10 minutes long, and they're more in depth about a variety of topics that are related to vegetable gardening, and they're in order of kind of basically how you would flow through the season. So it starts off with planning your garden and getting your soil prepared, and you know, pest management and watering and so on. So it's almost like a mini master gardener class, a very condensed time frame, and very well done. I think my colleagues did a great job putting that together. We have a mentorship program that's a little bit on hold because the demand for it is greater than our capacity to meet that demand at the moment, but we're hitting the pause button on it for right now. But please know that if you're either from Penobscot or Aroostook County, you can contact me, or you can contact folks. I have colleagues throughout the state to mentor you individually, one-on-one, ourselves as staff. So the mentorship program was primarily matching our volunteers with folks to do that mentorship, but staff are available for you as well. And we have webinars as well. They're recorded, but we also have live webinars. So we have one on garden design coming up, for example. So definitely things to keep an eye out for. And it could go on and on and on, but this is just, if you ever are interested, Google UMaine gardening. That's the easiest way to remember. Or if you have a specific question, like how do I prune my raspberries, just write that question in and then put in the words UMaine extension, and you should be linked right to our resources. The Maine School Garden Network. Many of you have probably either heard of this or involved with the Maine School Garden Network already. But I can't emphasize enough the power of networking and just talking with colleagues that are working with this young audience that you are, and doing similar things and facing similar challenges. They do a great job bringing people together that are you know, like-minded and innovative and energetic around this topic. And they do have an annual meeting, and this time it's actually up in the Old Town area. So they will be visiting Rogers Farm as part of their annual meeting. So if you want to kill two birds with one stone and get to visit Rogers Farm and connect with the Maine School Garden Network, this is a great time to do that. But they also do a nice job building awareness about different grant resources, and support like school garden coaches and such. So they have a lot of great programs there. And curriculum, they link you to a lot of great curriculum as well. And speaking of, you know, building networks and whatnot, I think there is so much that you can learn from each other. You know, knowing where the school gardens are around the state is so important, because you can oftentimes just drop in on a weekend and walk around the site, visit the playground and see the gardens, and learn so much just by being in the space and seeing how others have laid it out, Obviously, it's always great to talk with the coordinators and see what they wish they had done differently or what they really like about their space, so you can kind of learn from their experiences. But if you don't have time to make an appointment and meet up with someone or just don't feel like it, just going into those spaces is really powerful. This is the one at Old Town Elementary School that I shout out about all the time, because it's just, as you can tell just from these 4 pictures, it's an incredible space. And I'm sure you have exposure to some great spaces and maybe even have those spaces yourselves. So I encourage you to try to reach out to one another as well, even if you don't want to get involved in the Maine School Garden Network. So actually, Deb, would you mind launching that poll real quick? Because I'd love to know a little bit more about like what age ranges you work with, and whether you're actually doing any gardening right now or have gardened in the past. And so the questions that I'm asking is, what age range do you work with, and select all that apply. Hopefully you all can see that poll. And then how many years have you been gardening? And that's you personally, not just gardening with kids or youth. And do you currently garden either indoors or outdoors with the youth that you serve? We've got a couple responses. And I'm not sure if the phone person probably can't do the
Right.
If you wanted to unmute yourself.
I just did,
Sandy,
yes.
Sandy. Yeah. So do you want to let us know their age range?
Go ahead. I've been gardening since 1977, quite a few years. I can honestly say I was mentored by a sweet old Frenchman that I rented an apartment from. He and his wife had a garden, and but I had been exposed to gardens at 2 of my uncles and aunts' homes as a youngster, and I always loved having my hands in the dirt. But my family never had a garden all the time I grew up. We should have, because I was middle of 7 children and could have probably used a beautiful big garden. But yeah, so we've been doing it for 45 years. I garden stuff inside. I garden stuff outside, both. I've done hoop houses. Hoping to create another one. Ours got lost in a storm a couple of years ago. But what was the first question?
The age range that you're working with.
Age range. Okay, yeah. So I deal with children 6 weeks to school age currently. But like when I garden with my children, even the ones, my youngest one now is 5 months old. So when we're planting seeds, the babies are there with us. And I put a seed in their hand and I tip their hand into the dirt because I really fully believe that we all grow from how we're touched. And I just think kids have such innocent, powerful, positive vibes that when these kids touch seeds, they're going to grow better than the ones that I just touched myself. I love that. And I love the concept that even the very youngest children get involved with our gardening. It's a very minor and kind of in some people's minds kind of a silly way, but I like it, and I've been doing it, and I've been doing childcare just as long as I've been doing gardening. So it's always happened, and my gardens have always flourished. I mean, there are some failures, and we're fine with those too, but every year we have some major successes.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. And I'm glad that you mentioned your mentor too, because so many people don't have that family connection that I work with a lot of retirees or folks that are 40 and over, at least. And that generation still had that exposure as kids of gardening with their families. But there are a lot of families that didn't have that. The younger parents didn't have that growing up, and now their children are not necessarily having that experience. And so you have a really, really fascinating role, an important role in at least providing that introduction. I think about how actually my family did garden when I was growing up, but one of my mentors that I really remember learning a lot from was a security guard at college who taught me how to transplant seedlings when I was working in the garden. And I just, you know, there's certain individuals that you'll never forget mentoring you through that process. So.
And you hit on something majorly, because I work with the kids, and obviously the way we eat, the way we garden, all these different things, I'm mentoring a way of life for them. But we can't underestimate the fact that we also are influencing these young families, the young moms and dads that did not. I mean, I've had a few people that are from the county and their families had big gardens, and but the majority of my daycare families do not garden, but until they come here, and then they realize the kids have gardens in their play yard, you know, raised beds that they work with, and the parents see that the kids get to bring home vegetables from that garden and share with their families for dinner time. And what it does is it turns them on. And when I have excess, like cucumbers, tomatoes, zucchinis, whatever we have, and if I'm not using them, not only do parents pick up children, but they pick up excess food that I've grown in the garden with their children. And it turns them on to that amazing flavor, and they realize it's even better than the fresh produce they buy at the grocery store because it was just picked that day. And so what happens, inevitably, every single year, I have one or two parents that come to me and say, how do I start having a couple of raised beds in my yard? And then the next year they have a couple more. And I mean, some of them have like 12 or 14 now, you know, that over the years, you just keep adding to it. And to me, I think,
oh my gosh, well, you're reminding me of the 4-H model, which is like where 4-H started 100 years ago, plus years ago, was that these researchers that were studying how to best grow crops were trying to get this new research-based information out to the commercial farmers, and these farmers were not adopting these proven techniques. And they said, well, let's teach the kids and have the kids show it off to their parents. So you're doing exactly that. Yeah.
It's a great feel. It's a great feel, especially when parents come in, and like I had one mom, she was waiting for somebody to come help her make her beds. So she had started some plants that she couldn't even put in her garden because it wasn't there last year. But she was doing a lot of things out of buckets. She ended up bringing seedlings here. We incorporated them into our larger garden. And so I grew that family's cabbages and that family's sweet potatoes last year. But it was wonderful because that was like little Rowan section in my garden. And the mom and dad were just absolutely beside themselves that I was willing to do that.
Oh, I thought that was awesome. That was very cool. Oh, you know, I'm just realizing, are you guys seeing the poll up on my screen?
Yes, we can see the poll. Would you,
I
think I can close that out.
Yeah, I was just going to see if I could get rid of it.
There we go.
Yeah, that is super cool that they got to have their family garden at your spot too. Oh, is that, maybe, do we have to share the results?
Oh,
I don't know. How do we get rid of this?
I thought we did, but is it gone for you?
No. Is it gone for you?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Great.
Let me just stop sharing. Can't seem to drag this. I'm going to stop sharing for just a sec. Yeah. There we go. Now, can you see my screen?
You can.
Okay. So I shared a couple resources already. Just one, let's see here. People Resources, Maine School Garden Network Extension. Cultivating Joy and Wonder is a great resource from Sherburne Farms. They have a lot of very useful ideas and anecdotes about working with this younger age group that all of you appear to be working with. This is just one of countless resources on gardening, but this one seemed to be one that rose to the top in terms of being very valuable on my radar. I have not read through all of the resources that are out there, but this is one that really came through. Another one, if you're interested in focusing on math, I've seen some really great ideas on this one called Math in the Garden. It's easy to remember. And then obviously there are just countless picture books. If you're ever interested in just leafing through a kind of consolidated collection, as a parent and a horticulturist, I seem to be a magnet for these books. So lots of people send them my way, or I get them myself. And so I have them at my office. I think I'm actually going to stash them in a waterproof bin at the farm in the garden. I'm hoping to have a reading area. So I'm trusting that people will just enjoy them there and not walk off with them. But if they walk off with them, I hope they enjoy them. But if you want to check them out, just give me a shout and ask me where they are and I'll let you know. This one's a really fun one to read out loud. And it's actually botanically a little bit in depth. So it's probably for the little bit older group towards the 5-year-olds. But it's a really fun read and it does rhyme beautifully. Another resource that a lot of gardeners, gardens, either community gardens, school gardens, and individual gardens are getting into is this Pollinator Friendly Garden Certification Program. And it's not just a program, that we put a stamp on your garden and say you're pollinator friendly. It's a learning process. So the application is aimed at celebrating those gardens that are top tier, that not only offer nectar and pollen food sources, but also provide shelter and water and a commitment to conserving pollinator habitat in the area being certified. So the application itself is I think 6 pages, and it's mostly plant lists that you can check off what you have and what you don't have. But there are reminders of what you should be doing to support pollinators. And it's a fun process to go through with the kids as far as making sure the pollinators have access to water and what kind of shelter can you build them. And so that's making bee houses is a really fun project, and they can take those things home with them as well. And then during the pandemic, my family was like a lot of other families where we were trapped at home, happily doing a lot of gardening together. And so I got some footage of my kids and I doing some family-friendly projects. I cringe a little bit at looking at the video quality because this is when I all of a sudden learned how to take a video and learn how to produce a video. So just note that they're early pandemic quality, and I've learned how to use Adobe Pro and whatever now. But there's everything from how to grow a tomato in a bag to there's a bean bag one where people are growing in a bag, growing little bean sprouts in a bag. Native tree seed observation, how to establish a straw bale garden, like how to select a site and prep the straw bale, how to grow microgreens indoors, and how to make seed tape. And then a fun one on jump starting spring by forcing branches to bloom indoors. So there's definitely some ones to check out, and I will make sure that you get a link to those as well. So one of the things that I wanted to share with you is just some basic information about selecting the sites. It looks like all of you have gardens on site. So I think I'm speaking a little bit to the recording audience as well and offering some tips, but the biggest thing is being in close proximity to the garden as much as possible. One of my colleagues who's retired a few years ago, she used to do our design class for us, and I always drooled at how close her gardens were to her pathway between where she parks her car and her doorway. And I was so envious of that because she would walk by her garden, whether she wanted to or not, and notice when things needed to be picked or when any insects were causing a problem or not causing a problem. She could enjoy the cool things that are happening in there too. But just really observing her garden and monitoring is one of the most important techniques a gardener can do to be successful. The earlier you catch problems, the easier it is to address those problems. And when you can harvest things at the right time, obviously those are much more enjoyable. And then your kids, the youth that you're serving, are going to learn so much more from a garden that's right in their own space. So that might even be indoors. It doesn't have to be a fancy garden like this one. It can be on the windowsill as well, and that's close proximity too. And so this garden I point out as a good one because the kids have to walk down this pathway to get to and from school. This actually circles around the school as well, and the garden is literally right in the playground area too, which, you know, for better or for worse, there are challenges, as you can imagine, working with busy kids, having a garden so close to the playground. So, you know, these tend to be a little bit less disheveled than the ones that are in the playground itself. One other thing to note is the fence along here. This is Old Town, and Old Town is notoriously full of deer. And so close proximity to high traffic areas is going to be a deer deterrent in itself. It's not going to be what keeps the deer away all the time, because wildlife are incredibly smart too. And can get incredibly hungry and will eat through a lot of different things, but this is helpful at least. And I was really impressed at how mindful they were about that. And they tend to put row cover over things that tend to be a little bit more attractive to the deer. I got an email from the coordinator this afternoon, and they're looking at planting cabbages soon. So we're going to put some row cover over them to protect them from a little bit of the herbivory. Hopefully the deer don't knock that row cover off or anything like that. Another thing to think about is obviously sunlight exposure. That can be a lot of a challenge, a big challenge for a lot of gardeners. Is, you know, assessing the sunlight at this time of year can be challenging because you have deciduous trees that haven't leafed out yet. It might seem like a sunny spot, but then you have the leaf out happening, and then boom, there's shade. So just looking around at structures in the area that might shade the space, but also plant material up above that might shade out the space as well. And then access to water is huge. I know a lot of folks have, you know, feel like, okay, we can lug water and get this done, but with the summers that we've been having, we've had a lot of dry summers, and you just can't count on it. And gardening is hard enough as it is. We don't want to have any more barriers in our way to accomplishing our goals. So the closer you can be to your water source, and the more strategic you can be in laying out your water source is really helpful. It's a little bit hard to see here, but there's a spigot right here hooked up, and this accesses this set of beds. And whoever's our water helper here, all they need to do is drag the hose this way and then down the edge to get to these 4 beds. And then this spigot right here is in between here, and it can water these 2 beds and then the 2 beds back here. And they don't have to drag it across the beds, which can quickly destroy crops. And, you know, kids are often ready to get a project done really fast, or may not be always paying attention to where that hose is. And so kind of doing some risk management when you set things up like irrigation can pay off huge dividends. So those are kind of some key things when thinking about the site. And soil is another piece of the puzzle too, and a huge topic that won't necessarily get into today, but welcome to talk soils anytime with you. There it is. You know, bed arrangement can be a big game changer for gardens when you're working with youth. If you have a really, imagine this was just one giant square, you wouldn't have anyone really easily able to work in the center of that bed unless you put in some stepping stones. And even then you'd have kids potentially walking through parts of the bed, and that could be challenging. But having this U shape with this very high surface area, edge surface area, gives lots of bodies spaces, places to get their hands in the garden and be able to do a little bit more crowd management in a garden bed like this. So I really love this. They actually used cedar, I think it was cedar or hemlock for the raised bed itself, and then did the that heavy duty decking that I think it's like a plasticky material for the top as a spot for little buns to sit on. It was just the right size for them to be able to sit right on there and work in the garden. Another thought, if you're working with raised beds, is to have a series of beds that are kind of in this kind of square shape, where you might have plenty of room for people to work through this area, and then make sure you have some water sources on either corner. So this water source could serve these two beds and you're not tangling up the hoses in one another. This water source could serve those two beds. And again, these have their own surface area. So this is like maybe a 6 foot by 4 foot raised bed, or maybe even a 5 foot by 3 foot raised bed, enough narrow enough for them to be able to reach into the center. And they all can have their own space around these, and this could be enough to, in theory, fit a good sized group, probably 18 to 24 kids, without a lot of bumping. I love these beds. These are really fun because they can give space for seeding. You're right in the plants, sometimes a little too close to the plants, but I don't think that's a bad thing. And then they're kind of all facing in one direction, where you could kind of have someone, if you're doing some kind of instruction or read aloud, it's a comfortable space and a welcoming space to work in. I'm going to stop for just a minute. Did you have any questions or thoughts that you wanted to share on the pictures that I've shown?
Well, there is a question that came through, but not about bed arrangement. This one's about sort of like pest management. This is from Nyla, and she said she's interested in information on how to place natural items in the garden to help. So like marigolds planted next to tomato plants to deter slugs, or tobacco mixed with water to help deter certain bugs. She says her grandfather was a master gardener and used all natural items to help the plants establish and flourish. And she's looking for any tricks along that line.
That's a really good question, and one that we get a lot on. I wish there was a lot more research-based information on the benefits of companion planting in the context that they're asking about, in terms of things being deterred. Unsurprisingly, there is very little that kind of supports those anecdotal thoughts, but I value those anecdotal thoughts, because there's a reason why people have passed it around. So I mean, if you've had experience with certain pairings working, don't stop if it's working out well for you. But as far as research-based information, that, like for example, marigolds, there is one tidbit: they will deter a nematode in the soil, which is a small, like worm-like creature. There's definitely evidence of that, and there is evidence that marigolds are actually what's called a trap crop for one pest, which is slugs. So if you wanted to use them as a crop where you're kind of trying to lure them away from other things, and then gather those slugs and get them out of your garden that way, because they're all in one spot, that's another strategy. Yeah, I could see Deb's like, I don't want to be the gatherer.
I had no idea. That's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, actually a more tidy way of doing it that I've had experience with is actually putting a board down in the garden, or some kind of habitat for those slugs to migrate into. During the hot sunny days, what they're going to do is they're going to all migrate into that dark, cool space. And then you can go and just use like a stick to slide them off the board into like a bucket of soapy water. Save your beer for yourself. But that's just one option. There are a lot of non-chemical management strategies. I mentioned row cover, which is a spun-bound material that you can drape over plants that are typically prone to pests, such as like the cabbage moth. Not only were we protecting them from the deer eating them, but we were also protecting them from a moth laying their eggs on the cabbage and causing all those worms or larvae to destroy the cabbage. But there are definitely a lot of strategies, crop-specific strategies that I could get into as far as how to manage pests without chemicals. And as I'm sure you know, using any chemicals, there are laws and regulations, especially when you have a business or a school. So making sure that you do your due diligence about knowing what you can and cannot apply in your specific situation is so important. A lot of people are surprised to hear that community gardens, for example, no one can apply anything, whether it's off the shelf or home recipe or anything in a community garden or school garden setting without permission from the landowner and a pesticide applicator's license for that particular setting. So it's a surprise to a lot of people, but there's a reason for it. Because, if you have some white dust on your plants and it might be baking soda, for example, and you're just trying to try something to deter something. And a child has a reaction to something other than that, but they were around it and people don't know what it is or make assumptions, it could cause some problems. That's just one scenario, but there are many reasons why those laws are in place. But long story short is, if you have a particular pest problem or know you're going to be growing a crop and want to anticipate the pest problems and know how to manage them and avoid them, give me a shout and I can talk you through those specific ones. And we have a lot of good information on our website. We have an IPM, Integrated Pest Management website as well. So that was a very probably overly lengthy response. But, pest management does tie in with another piece of the puzzle when you're doing gardening with in your setting is planning out where you want to have different things in your garden. This is just a map that I did with a couple of volunteers the other day, showing how we wanted to rotate what kind of crops are in each type of bed from year to year. So in year 2022, we're going to have melons in bed A. We're going to have a big bed of beans in bed B. Bed C is going to start out in carrots. And then when we harvest those carrots, because carrots don't take all season long if we plant them early enough, we can get a crop of parsnips after that. So we'll plant those after the carrots get pulled out. So we can get 2 crops out of bed C. And we might even get a couple of beds. We might do something after the beans as well in bed B. We didn't really talk about that. Bed D is going to be all the things in the onion family, and I won't go through all the rest, but basically the theory is that what we're going to do is we're going to move different plant families from bed to bed. So pest and disease pressures don't build up from year to year. Plants within the same family actually oftentimes have the same nutritional needs, so they'll draw the same nutrients out of the garden in the soil from year to year. So if we're planting the same thing from year to year, there'll be some nutrition issues that crop up. So it's good to just move things around if you can. Now, if I was tilling this whole space at the end of the season, then crop rotation really wouldn't matter that much because you're moving the soil around and mixing things up. But these are actually dedicated beds. These are beds that are not changing. We're not mixing the soil from site to site. We might be using a digging tool from one and to the other, but we're not rototilling from site to site. So doing this, I actually just did this in Google Slides. So you don't have to have anything fancy to map things out. And I just make a new slide for each year. I copy this one and I can do that record keeping, and I can share it with someone else. So in case I lose the file, someone else has the file, and so on. So there's definitely some pretty simple crop planning things that you can do to keep track of that information. And there's even more simple ones, piece of paper and having sticky notes that you're keeping track of what you have. And if you have a series of raised beds, for example, raised bed A is things in the pea family. And that's, this is year 1, for example, this group of 4. And then year 2, you can move those around and say, put the sticky note over here and for the pea family, and have that in raised bed C, and so on. So there's definitely a lot of different strategies to crop planting and rotating your crops. I think that's a really big way of using strategy to avoid pest and disease pressure. So a lot of people are interested in kind of what kind of crops grow well. You're a different audience actually, because I usually I'm talking with traditional school year groups, and so you actually, this might not be of interest to you because you're with the kids during the summer as well, but it might be a strategy for you to consider. There are crops that are incredibly easy to grow and are kind of one and done things, like garlic. That's a fun one to plant in the fall. You plant just the cloves themselves. They're big and chunky, so it's great for little hands. I really, really like garlic for little planters. And you can see the point, and you want the point up. And even if you plant it upside down, you might want to put a few upside down just to have them see what happens. They actually grow a little J shape and do grow upright, but you won't see that until they're harvested. But you can harvest the scapes, which are the curlicue stalks that garlic will grow. And that's another thing that could be enjoyed. I didn't write it down in here, but in early July, late June. So it's a fun one, especially because it's so flavorful. It definitely elicits a reaction from the kids. Some kids really love it. I know that I've had a number of kids fight over the garlic clove in the dilly beans that we share during our visits. So it's definitely one that they'll talk about and react to for sure. Onions are a really sturdy crop. I'm actually going to be planting our onions and probably on Fridays, at least a bunch of them. They've been hardening off in my backyard for a couple weeks now. And so those could be planted in mid-April, and then you could, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't change that. We're not going to be threshing onions. We're going to be harvesting them in September. The threshing refers to the dry beans. Dry beans are a really fun one that a lot of gardeners don't consider growing themselves. But those are beans that you plant and then you just let them dry on the vine, and then you can take them out of the dried pods. In that experience for kids, I've witnessed, and it was so fun to see how joyful they were. And beans can be really beautiful too, depending on the variety that you're working with there. Just especially if you plant 2 or 3 different types of dry beans, pulling them out of the pod themselves is like opening a gift. And I have seen kids act like that. It's not just me being a geeky gardener. I remember watching a bunch of kids, we had a pile of dry bean plants that were on top of a tarp in a gymnasium, and they were all over there tearing them apart and stomping on them and taking them apart, and I could overhear their conversation. They're like, I'm bringing this to school tomorrow for a show and tell. And it was just something kind of fun to see. And at that point in the season, I was a little burnt out. So to see that joy kind of like recharge my batteries about how cool seeds are. And I won't go through.
Could I insert something? This is Sandy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Last year was the first year I did trials for dried beans. As you get older, you realize you have to eat a little bit differently, and so I eat dried beans cooked every single day, at least about a cup, sometimes a cup and a half. But anyway, I have 50 different varieties in my home. A lot of them are heritage beans that I've purchased, but I put probably 12 different varieties in my garden last year. It was an incredible experience. And like you said, when we were as kids, I was just as excited as the children as we started cracking open those dried bean shells. It was just all these beans and the beautiful colors that were coming out. And I served the children beans 3 times a week, one in a hummus form, and then 2 other times, usually in a meal, like a chili or something like that. But we have soup once a week, and we always put our beans in the soup. So, I mean, they love. I try every single one. We even found a bean called Corona, of all names, but it's like the biggest, meatiest lima type bean ever. It turned out to be my absolute favorite. It's like you're biting into a steak. It's incredible. But my kids love them. And so I think that if anybody and beans are so easy to grow, it's almost like a no-fail crop. So if somebody was just wanting to try beans, like even if you're trying the scarlet runner beans, you can eat the leaves. You can eat the pods when they're young as a bean, but you can also eat them once they're dried. You can save them and cook them that way. So to me, it's just like in this world of uncertainty and high cost of food, it's an amazing plant protein that you can have in store, and you can definitely cut your cost on your grocery bill, but you're also serving those children and yourself amazingly well.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. If you can get a kid to eat beans and fall in love with beans, then you have scored some giant points for sure. Because it is.
All my children do. I serve 20 children on a daily basis, and every single child loves the beans. But they held a lot of the beans, helped put them in the ground. Mm-hmm. They also took care of those beans, help weed, help water, help harvest. When we have excess beans, sometimes we, when we're picking like our green beans and such, we divide them up into 20 different mounds, and the kids talk about math, but and then we deliver them down to Persistence, which is an elderly housing unit that's low-income senior citizen housing. It's only like 0.8 of a mile from my home. But I deliver them, and I let them know that children, probably ages 2 to 5, grew these beans for them. That population absolutely loves it. That community thinks it's the most fascinating thing ever. But our children here are giving back to the community, and just preschoolers. I think it's incredibly rewarding in all, no matter how you look at that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I bet they taste even better too to the folks at Persistence because they know where they came from. And actually, dry beans, I was really surprised the first time I cooked with them. I don't know if you had that experience where it's like they cook shockingly fast, and they're so much more delicious when you have them fresh from the garden. So, have you had that experience, Sandra?
I have. I initially, before I started growing them, I ordered them from a place called Rancho Gordo out of California, and they have, when they harvest their crops, they send their supply. I'm actually in a bean club with them. It's just like I'm so into beans, but it was their beans. I mean, there's so many beans. They have gazillions of different kinds. But you're right. When you get a fresh bean that you're growing, it takes very little time on the stovetop to cook. And I always start off with like onion, garlic, carrot, and celery. I dice them up really small, and I don't use oils when I cook, so I saute them. And if it starts to, I usually start with the onion and celery because they're so higher water content when I saute. But if I need a little bit more moisture, I just add a little water. And then I put those into the beans, and they kind of disappear as you're cooking them just because of the fact that I dice them so tiny. But it just adds so much more flavor. And but I even have a couple of Mexican pots, clay pots that I put on my gas stove, and I cook them in those pots. And in the way that those pots are designed, it kind of rolls them. But at the same time, I've done them in cast iron pots, and I've done them in stainless steel pots on my stove, and I've never, ever been disappointed. Like you said, it doesn't take long. The flavor is incredible. The kids have eaten, I think in the past year, they probably have eaten, of the 50 different varieties that I have here in my home, I think they've probably eaten about 40 of them.
That's cool. That is very, very cool. I hope everyone decides to grow beans this year. And some folks might be interested in starting a new garden too, or giving their garden a rest. So I just wanted to kind of weave this topic in a little bit too. So if you're in that space where you either are looking at a piece of lawn saying that's going to make a great garden, I want to make it into a garden this year, something to consider is actually tarping it. And not diving into it for at least half of the season, maybe doing a midsummer crop after it's had a chance to cook underneath that tarp and kill off all those weeds. And what you would do is put that tarp down on that area as soon as you can. Leave it for as long as you're willing to leave it. Ideally, 4 or 5 months, but if you wanted to do a mid-season crop, you could take it off like on the 1st of August. And by then, hopefully all the perennial weeds and all the turf will have been killed off. And you can either incorporate in anything that needs to be incorporated in for soil amendments based on a soil test, or you can just plant right in. If the soil is friable enough, you can just plant right in that space. But that's an easier way to manage the weeds ahead of time than to try to till up that area. Because if you have perennial weeds in new areas that you're trying to get established, what you're doing if you go and just run a tiller into a sodded area, you're breaking up a lot of the weed roots, and then those are propagating into new weeds and they'll just be there again in a couple weeks. So if you can smother them, that's a better longer term option. But I also throw this out there as sometimes life gets crazy and busy, and it's important to have a strategy to take a break from the garden and not let it get overrun with weeds. So if you're at that stage in your gardening journey, it's okay to throw a tarp over your garden too. We demonstrate tarps at Rogers Farm, for example, and I was at first a little sheepish about having the tarps in this wonderful demonstration space, but it's a fact of life. I talk with countless gardeners that are going, for good things, like they're going on a trip for the first half of the summer, or maybe they broke their leg or something, some life event has happened and they need to take a break. If you can anticipate those weeds being there and try to nip that problem in the bud by blocking them out, either cardboard or tarping is going to help you out a lot in the long run, especially when you think about weed seeds. And if you have weeds that go to seed and then they drop those seeds, some weeds can drop 30 to 300,000 seeds per plant. There's some weed plants in our Maine landscape that will drop hundreds of thousands of seeds. So that's just something to sit on and think about. On a brighter note, some activities. I just want to blast through some fun, and these are just quick introductions. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about how to do these things, like I said, I have some videos, and in the link that I'll share with Deb, there'll be actually instruction sheets that go with those videos too, so you can see what supplies might be needed and the learning objectives for these activities. So microgreens is a really great one. You don't have, I try to focus my activities actually on things that don't involve actually having a garden because kids can learn so much just by handling the seeds and seeing them grow for even a short period of time. This is popcorn, and popcorn actually produces a incredibly flavorful green, microgreen. So what I'm doing here when I grow popcorn microgreens is I'm literally sowing the popcorn seeds on top of the soil, on moistened soil. I put a plastic baggie over this and let it stay nice and humid, and these seeds will germinate rather quickly. I keep them very well watered, and probably within 5 or 6 days at the most, they'll start showing this growth. And it's a nice observational activity because you can see a seed germinate right off the bat. The root will actually set into the soil and get established a little bit. And you want to let them grow to be about, 3 to 4 inches tall. And they could be even harvested a little bit shorter than that. And when you go through and you actually take a pair of scissors right at the soil line and cut them off, and you have these little shoots that you're eating that taste just like popcorn. They're not that same texture as popcorn, but they have that sweet flavor as popcorn. So it's a fun one, but there are a number of different crops that you can grow as microgreens. What you're looking at is pretty close to harvestable stage. You're just sowing the seed and growing them for a couple weeks, and sometimes even less than that, depending on the species. So what is so lovely about this is that it's a low time commitment. It's a quick turnaround. And if you're interested in exposing the kids to different flavors, there's a lot of different fun experiments that you can do and conversations that you can have with the kids about what you like, what you don't like, and why you don't like it, and building in language skills about using adjectives to describe foods and so on. So the learning opportunities are endless. And you can't really see it in this slide, but one of the things that I usually use for my seed and my microgreens is just a lasagna tray or one of those aluminum bread pans. And so those are really easy access things to get. You don't have to get a fancy microgreen tray. You can, they're quite nice. These have like a mesh bottom to them. But even those little aluminum bread pans that are about yay size, you just take a nail or even a pencil and poke holes in the bottom of them. So there's some drainage. You don't want it to be soupy and holding water. And then you just put some pre-moistened potting mix in there. I prefer to work with like a seed starting mix, and then sprinkle the seeds on, cover it with plastic, and you're good to go. And you don't always have to have a grow light because you're growing it for such a short period of time that a sunny window, south-facing window, will probably do the trick. They won't be robust and beefy like these ones because they're probably going to be a little bit lankier. But even then you can still do that. And what I like about this is that it's one of those things that translates to what a child could do at home. Even if families could see this and say, I could probably grow my own microgreens. And it's not as, a big of a project as actually having their own raised bed. So it's doable. Another thing, I made this today because I needed to take pictures and give you a visual, are the seed necklaces. And so these are probably something you've seen in gardening activity books and whatnot, but it's just incredibly simple. You just need a bag, a hole punch, some seeds, and it can be any type of seed. It's better to work with some larger seeds, especially with little hands. It's easier for them to manipulate. Plus it's a little bit more showy. And easier to visualize what's happening. The reason why I'm putting 2 bags in here is because a spin on what's oftentimes given in directions is to have them wear one and then have them do another one that they put somewhere, maybe in like a cooler spot in their home or in the daycare, and have them make note of which one might grow faster, or make guesses as to which one will grow faster, and do comparisons. And there could definitely be a lot of potential for weaving in some science concepts there, and really, really fun observations that are firsthand. And if they're wearing against their body, why would it grow faster? And obviously they'd want to take it off at home. So there might be some logistical challenges with your audience, but I'm sure you're very creative in how to navigate those ones. This was early in the pandemic with my little one. We had such a huge amount of viable acorns around us. So it's as simple as I feel like everyone in their life should have the experience of germinating an oak tree. And I've actually just recently learned a lot about the value of oak trees in our landscape. Ecologically, they are one of the huge keystone plant species, actually, keystone species, period. They host over 200 different species of moths and butterfly species in our area, lepidopteran species, and those in turn feed birds. Most birds actually feed their younger generation caterpillars, thousands of caterpillars per baby. So if you think about the value of an oak tree that is a host plant to that many different caterpillars and how many birds that would help, the trickle down effect is pretty staggering. So it's just grabbing an acorn, sticking it in a pot and watching it grow is just a great experience. And even just having a whole pile of them and having them sort through the seeds. We had a blast just trying to count them and put them into the little things. She was doing that for at least a good 15 minutes, just putting them in the little container and then taking them out and putting them in piles. So really, really fun activity. We actually did an outing club with my older child, and there were acorns all over the place. And I just had them all take them home. I showed them how to just shove it in the ground. And I said, find a spot, take it home, shove it in the wet soil and see what happens. So you don't even have to have a pot. Just encourage them to be part of nature and play a role in nature.
Another piece on
Yeah.
I'm sorry, another piece on acorns here. We have, I mean, I live on an 87-acre property, and so we have old stagecoach roads. We have a 3/4 acre pond that we stock with trout. We have a lot of really rich things that we share with our children. But even in the fall, we gather acorns that the squirrels have not gathered, and we put them in buckets, and after big storms, we go out on some of those foot trails, and we deposit them in different places where we know deer are traveling. So we're feeding wildlife when food is a little bit scarcer for them. I just think there's just so many different opportunities if you just stop and think about how nature works, and if we can help. Because when we even plant in our garden, I always tell the kids we have to plant enough for us. We have to plant enough for the insects that's going to inevitably come in and take over some of our food, and we also have to plant enough for the wildlife. So because we know there's going to be a porcupine or a raccoon or or maybe a deer, But I think that's an important piece for kids to understand, that it's not all, the gardens are not all about us and what we desire, and there's no set amount that we're going to get. It's always a surprise at the end of the year, like how much we harvest that we can use. But, and even like if we have Japanese beetles, the kids help me collect them. We throw them into these little cut-off milk cartons with water. We dump them in, and we take them to the chickens. The chickens absolutely adore it. So it's just like you can keep feeding, you can keep doing, you can keep exposing, giving ideas, and we all have to work together.
Yeah. And it's a reminder that, the landscape itself is a garden. So it's all a matter of perspective. And so whether it's a garden for us or a garden for our wild counterparts, it's all a garden. And so that's why I kind of like tie in some nature type themes, because children don't have to have a vegetable to teach them about life cycles and how plants work. You can take advantage of the life cycles that are happening all around us, just by taking note yourself and observing and actually following their lead on their observations too. And I think that's something that shouldn't be lost too. Don't force yourself to have a garden and make a lot more work for yourself if you have a natural landscape around your site that you can glean a lot of great information and learning experiences from.
Exactly. Yeah, and I have a son that's he'll be 38 here in June, and he spends every evening after work, he's out there in the woods on our property, and he watches the deer and he watches all the wildlife. And so he asked me, Mom, when you start planting all your plants, will you plant extra like broccoli, different type of crops, different wildlife likes? And he's just sporadically planting it, just to feed wildlife. But I think that's a fabulous thing. I mean, he's been making these incredible trails, foot trails. We have, like I said, we've always managed and groomed our old stagecoach trails that we could drive a car on if we wanted to, but it allows us to actually push strollers, through the woods, from here to the pond is a half a mile, but we can push strollers the whole way without any issues. And Arnie is such a sweetheart. He mows, keeps everything mowed down so that tick populations are less. We're constantly thinking about all different angles, but Greg has made a ton of foot trails, like probably 3 or 4 miles of them on our property. And he's also realized, this is a trail that deer like to go. This is a trail that turkeys are traveling. So he's saying, oh gosh, you should be planting stuff so we can put it out there to help support these populations. And so we're doing that. That's a new
embracing it.
Yeah, you have to.
Yeah. these are a couple of ideas on the visual side of things, getting them to appreciate the color and the patterns in nature. So I just grabbed a bunch of paint chips and from a paint store and did a rainbow scavenger hunt at the peak of our color season at Rogers Farm. So that's one fun activity that I like to have our visitors do. One I forgot to actually put a picture of. It's the most simple activity. It was a game changer when I learned about it. Is just putting a piece of masking tape around your wrist, sticky side up, so that you can stick things to the masking tape and make patterns from what you have in the garden. Anytime we have visitors, I want them to be welcome to take from the garden. I don't want to be a garden where it's hands off. So many places are like that for youth, and so I just try my best to establish some clear guidelines of taking small bits from plant material. So this is actually big bits, but I say, you know, a petal here or a piece of a leaf here is not going to destroy a plant. And I want you to be able to remember the garden at the end of the day and tell your family about your visit to the garden and have a conversation piece. So I talk about it being a souvenir bracelet. So we talk about what the word souvenir means, which is new to a lot of kids too. So it's a fun activity. And then these are just a couple of other art projects that we've done in the past. One is just grabbing a piece of plant, any piece of plant, and seeing if it makes color when you rub it onto something. And you can end up with some really surprising colors from different things. I think this dark green is a crayon, just so if you're wondering, like things like different types of flowers may or may not reflect their color that you can see when you look at the flower when rubbed onto a piece of paper. So it's a neat way to do some painting without any paints and learn a little bit about plant pigments. And I just love this mandala. That's actually my oldest, her art teacher gave that as an assignment, and I just thought it was a beautiful assignment. And then, you know, I wanted to put this visual up as thinking outside the pot. So you don't always have to have containers. You don't have to have little seed starting pots, like I mentioned, the lasagna pan or bread pan. You don't have to go out and buy a lot of stuff to get into gardening. So we did this is the bean bag one that I mentioned earlier, where we put a bunch of potting mix in this bag, used a fork to poke some holes in the bag, and then on one side of the bag, and then flipped it over, and there's a hole on this side, just one in the middle, where she put a couple bean seeds in there, and they sprout right up, and it's like a little container. And then if it establishes well enough, you'll see some roots around the side, so they can have that kind of root view experience. And then this is my oldest doing the same thing on a bigger scale, growing a tomato in a bag. And I've had really great success. You don't want to cram a lot into that bag. This was just one bag and one tomato seedling. And that is the perfect amount to grow one tomato. And you don't need to have a big pot or anything like that, but you do need to have drain holes. And interestingly enough, in my experience, I've found that these do not dry out like a 5-gallon bucket would, because you have the plastic preventing the evaporation loss from happening. And so it's incredible. You don't have to water it nearly as much as a 5-gallon bucket. And then I will share with you tips and tricks on doing newspaper pots. So thinking about not using plastic pots. One way you can do that is actually just taking a piece of newspaper, some tape, and a cylindrical object, and then creating a pot out of that yourself. And I'll do a little video here that kind of shows how to do that. We do this with our Master Gardener volunteers as one of their propagation activities, is having them make the pot and then sow the tomato seeds at the relatively late time of year, late time of spring, usually after when most gardeners would actually do their seed starting. Which for tomatoes, I like to sow them in mid-April. So I'll be sowing mine pretty soon. But a lot of gardeners have already started their tomato seedlings, and they're oftentimes surprised at how you can sow them relatively late and still get a great plant that fruits at the same time as your neighbors that started theirs.
Okay, can I ask, so you're planting things outside in mid-April, is that? what
No,
you're-
I'm starting
inside?
them inside.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
I
Thank you.
just
for
wanted
that.
I always heard no, you can't really do anything until the end of May. Is that outside, like end of
Well,
May
it
is?
depends on the crop. So I will share with you one of the things that I have on my desk at all times, even though I feel like I have it burned into my memory, is the planting chart for the home vegetable garden. And there are cold tolerant crops and warm season crops. And so onions, I mentioned, I kicked out of my house 2 weeks ago because I didn't have enough room on my seed starting stand for them anymore. Those actually are very cold tolerant. But things like tomatoes, I actually don't plant those until the beginning of June in our area. So there's the newspaper pot right there, just easy. I hope that I didn't distract you from seeing that. And then you can see, I think I'll jump ahead a little bit. I'm just pre-moistening the media, and let's see about, when I learned how to increase the playback speed on things, that was a game changer for me. I'm a very impatient YouTube watcher, especially when I'm watching my own videos. So I'm definitely spend a lot of time breaking up the media, making sure it's really well blended, almost like slightly drier brownie batter. You don't want it super wet, but you want it so that when you squeeze it, it holds into a ball, it forms a ball. So, but usually when it's fresh out of the bag, it is quite dry, unless the bag has a hole in it. But when I fill my newspaper pots or any pots, I try to fill it very loosely, but all the way to the top, so that it doesn't get too compacted. But then I use a little bit of gravity to get it to settle down. And then when I'm sowing seeds that need to be covered, I just leave a little bit of a water well there, or a little gap there between the soil and the top. And I usually, for like tomatoes, for this activity, I do 2 seeds in the pot. And then I never wear gloves. This is just for this video. I just put a little bit of soil on top and then water it in, and that gets really good contact. And I use just a plastic bag for these. If I'm just doing a single one with a group, I send everyone home with their little mini greenhouse, and it keeps it nice and humid. And any seeds that you're sowing that are covered with soil do not require light for germination. I mean, so you can just put it on top of a refrigerator, which is generally a warmer microclimate, and seeds will generally germinate a little bit faster if it's in a little bit of a warmer climate. Just don't forget it while it's up there on top of your refrigerator, and then as soon as it germinates, you put it in a sunny window. So there's a lot that can be sown right now. So I think a lot of folks feel like they've missed the boat in seed starting. So if you are interested in that, and actually I have a number of these for educational or food security projects. I often get donations from local vendors for seeds and seed starting supplies. And so if you're ever interested in getting some resources, contact me. If I have it, I'm happy to share. I am getting quite low in my supplies right now, but I have things like zinnias, I think, and broccoli, and some marigolds, and a lot of lettuce, I think, and some other ones. So on this list, so give me a shout and let me know what you're interested in. And if it would be something that we'd have to pick up at my office. I'm located by the airport, by the UMA campus, but I'm happy to help connect you with any resources that I do have access to. For educational or food security purposes. So with that, and also we have a milkweed patch in front of our office that I just let go. I was trying to kind of keep it into one little tidy corner and actually do other plantings of native plants around it. And then 2020 hit and I couldn't have any volunteers. So I had to put all my time into the demonstration garden, and that just like naturally filled in with milkweed. And we rescued, I think well, not rescued, but we collected and rehomed, I think it was 25 monarchs to different schools and organizations to give kids the monarch experience. So if you're in a situation this fall where you'd be interested in giving your kids this experience of watching a monarch develop, give me a shout and I'll do my best. It's kind of one of those things where they never hatch at the right time. So I had a lot of ours hatched before schools were ready for them. So usually they're ready, and I can collect the caterpillars in early August to mid-August. So give me a shout right around then, and I'll do my best to get you a little buddy.
Gosh, Kate, I love that. This is Sandy, because we have garden beds that are near the entry of my childcare, and randomly, about 6 years ago, a milkweed showed up. And I said, we're not pulling that. It's a weed, but we're leaving it. And so we've been able to hatch out monarchs every year. It's an incredible experience for the children. I have some amazing supportive educational pieces that I do with the kids. If anybody wants to, they can reach out to me and I'll share them with. But I think it's cool because it doesn't matter to me what time of the year, because we're not running on a fiscal school year. We're operating year round. So whatever nature says is happening, it's happening. And our families just absolutely enjoy it. And when we release the monarchs that we hatch, the kids are just so fascinated that they're a part of the whole piece. I think that's an amazing thing. Another thing too, and I haven't heard anything about it, but sensory gardens like herbs. We have one of my daycare moms offered me a chocolate mint years ago, which is so invasive, but I ended up putting it up into an old composting area, and it's kind of taken over it. But if we go on sensory walks the first day of every season, so it gets really exciting and interesting during the summer months, because we can walk through the garden and we have so many wonderful sensory moments from the herbs that we plant. And I have 4 different beds that are 4x4 that are just completely all herbal, and but the kids like it. They end up helping me dehydrate. We dehydrate enough parsley and oregano and thyme and dill for the whole year. And we even I get involved with Misfits, and Misfits is just like an online organic vegetable program, but we can purchase. It's like a grocery. But oftentimes they send the most incredible celery, and so all the leaves, we ended up taking them and dehydrating them, and we made our own celery salt. And the kids were so excited about that. But I'm always trying anything new or different, and I think trying something new should never be something new. And that's how I tell the kids about food. Trying a new food item should never be something new. We always should be out there experiencing new things, because our whole life really depends on new adventures. So, yeah. So anyways, that and root view. We have a root view garden going where we planted beets and onions and carrots, so the kids can see how those roots form. I ended up purchasing several years ago back from Carolina, I think it was Carolina Science Supply or something. It was a company.
Biological supply, yeah.
Yeah, and so we ended up buying this root view thing, and the kids absolutely, I mean, they asked me, when can we start our root view? Every single spring. It's a good thing. But those are simple things, and you can do it too. I mean, when you do vermicomposting with redworms or even our worms around here, I mean, I put 10,000 redworms into our garden because our vermicomposting got so crazy. It was just like, okay, we got to do something with all these worms. But it works good, and the kids understand that worms are the natural rototiller. I mean, that's nature creates that for us. And they're so important in our garden. I just think all those different little minor aspects of gardening, and it can be overwhelming for the first-time gardener, but at the same time, there's just so many different ways that you can share with children how nature, not just gardening, but how nature just interacts with gardening as we think it as human beings. And it's just, everybody benefits. Our world benefits, Earth benefits, we as consumers benefit. I just think it should be the way of life for everyone.
Yeah, oh, definitely. Your mention of sensory garden, I didn't really point out that this is a corner of one of the sensory gardens. So visually you can see that it's appealing because it's all these different textures, but it's a sound garden. It's like a lot of people get stuck on how do we do sound in a sensory garden with plants, but there's these little love and a mist seed heads that end up being like little rattles and the movement of the grass. And so there's a lot of great information on sensory gardens, but also, and I know, personally with my kids, they really like to have their senses engaged with their texture, especially. And so we had a bunch of very old seed in our seed bank that I was like, we're just going to have to chuck it. And so I ended up middle of this winter just bringing them home, and we opened up each bag of old seed, each packet, and emptied them out, and just to see the variety of different seed shapes. And I remember I was actually recording my youngest, and she said, "What a beautiful mess." And I was like, that is such a perfect quote. And you can get this beautiful mess just by going to the dry goods section of Tiller and Rye, for example. So you don't have to spend a lot of money on seed packets. You can just get dry beans and other types of seed type foods in bulk and create those little sensory bins. And they have so much fun playing around in that bin of seeds. And I have found a number of new pea plants and bean plants in my house plants, which have been fun, and I've just embraced it. So they do want to plant, and they do, and they do. They do. And, I created a template for a seed packet several years ago back with my children. And so every year we have several of them made up. And last year we grew banana peppers for the first time. And I didn't know how much I loved them until now. And I have them on my vegetable sandwich every morning for breakfast. But we collected our banana pepper seeds. And we collected a lot of seeds. And we dry them. And then all the kids... they package up some and take them home. We label them. They draw what their pumpkin or their squash or their banana pepper or whatever seed we've collected. They illustrate their own little packet. We label it, and then they take those seed packets home with them, and they can share them with their family. Whether or not the families will all use them, that's another thing. But we here definitely do, and the kids get really excited when I say, "Oh, we're going to be planting our banana pepper seeds that we collected last year." So, I just think there's so many different lessons that the garden allows us, and so I'm really glad that the child care field is starting to recognize the fact that we can incorporate that, because it covers almost every. When you plant a seed and you nurture it, you harvest it, and you teach the children. I mean, I have a preschool cooking program that I created probably 2 decades ago, and so one of my children's favorite pizzas is a Swiss chard pizza. And it's because they planted that Swiss chard seed. They took care of that plant. They harvested it, and then they came inside. They put on their little chef hats and their aprons, and we created something amazing. Those kids devour it. And not only those kids, but I remember when 4th of July, we were up at the house up in Greenville, and young adults in their 20s, Arnie's nephews and his friends came, and I brought stuff to make Swiss chard pizza,
on July 3rd in the evening, they consumed so much I had to run up to Indian Hill and buy more Swiss chard to make more pieces. And it just warmed my heart, you know. Yeah. But and I told them, you know, like the initial Swiss chard, it was growing in the garden. I had no idea I needed to bring this much up here because but you know, I think it's just like all that stuff still connects, and I think kids it resonates. That we really do have to go back to growing our own, enjoying our own, and reaping the benefits, the mineral, the vitamins. And I mean, we are going to be a healthier soul by eating from our garden. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's a fantastic note to end on, actually. I couldn't have said it better myself. That's it's so true. The ripple effect of what you guys are doing is incredible. And any moment that you can give them a chance to observe nature and interact with nature, whether it's in a formal garden or it's an indoor garden, or just have their hands on some seeds, or just a walk in the woods, is so valuable. So thank you for doing that and being proactive about it. I have been not monitoring the chat at all. So is there anything, Deb, that
No, nothing else came through. And I just really want to thank you, because I got a lot of ideas, and I'm not a gardener, as I was sharing with you earlier. So I'm excited to try some of those, like less committed little activities with my kids. And so I jotted some notes down, and I'm looking forward to trying the lasagna pan idea. That seems so manageable to me, instead of trying to tackle a big garden bed. So thank you. And I will be looking at the extension website as well.
Yeah, I'll send you some more direct links, but it's definitely a rabbit hole. And I actually, if I needed to use some more time, I had a rabbit hole that I was going to share with you, but I'm going to actually give it to you in a link to it. It was the Maine Audubon. I'm actually going to be doing a pollinator program tomorrow, and I was trying to find some nice little resources to supplement it. And they have a really wonderful series of videos that I'll send you a link to. And it's all about observing nature, and they're just very well produced, and they're very informal and really neat little vignettes on different aspects of nature in Maine. So they're things that will be right out in your backyard potentially. So I'll share that with you as well. So anyway, I appreciate the time and all your work, and hope to connect with you in the future.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.